Yeah.
I'm Jim Wicks. I'm only there when I used to. Nice to meet you. Real pleasure.
Okay, I'm in.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I think wear different hats. Depending on what day of the week it is.
Because when my son was
What do you do, Barbara?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I don't, Drew.
Here's my thing. So it's- Article on it.
Your work for an AI company?
Yeah, it's out of Australia. So they're asleep.
What type of AI?
It's now.
No.
It's now.
Digital green.
Saw that, like,
Not on board about
nice.
distress finance.
Well, we're coming now. We're using a lot of general.
Good evening, everybody. I'm supposed to wait for the computer to catch up to me.
It's actually.
All right, good. And I was talking to Barb earlier. We both realized we're both from Wisconsin. And if you know anybody from Wisconsin, they talk really fast. So I'll be through with this in a second. Anyway, we're so glad that everybody's here. We're so grateful that KPMG is hosting for us. And so that's all I have to say, but I'm going to introduce David Leiter to welcome the rest of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do I need this or you guys can hear me okay? Or is it
We can hear you.
recording? I can record. Is it recorded?
Yes.
Okay, it's recorded, so I'll use it. And Wisconsin is delightful. I know so after my 8 winters in Chicago. And just great people and geography and probably a little bit cooler than it is here in Atlanta today. But I'd like to welcome all of you here at KPMG. We very much value our relationship with NACD. And we're just thrilled to be hosting all of you here in our Ignition Center today. So what does that mean? At KPMG Atlanta, we have about 2,000 KPMGers here and growing, thanks to the well that folks like Chris St. Clair dug for all of us that we continue to drink out of. As I've said to some here, but Chris is the reason I'm at KPMG, and I consider her a mentor of mine today, but for the last 20 plus years for sure. And but so of our 2,000 KPMGers spread across 3 offices, downtown at Truist Plaza is our traditional office. And then we have a small office out near the Battery. But about 7 years ago, we opened up our Ignition Center here because we compete with Microsoft and Google and Amazon for talent. And when you bring that technology talent into an office that looks like CPAs work in that office, they don't get excited, right? So we needed space with putting greens and foosball, and there's a space across the way where pre-pandemic was Xbox and they were playing FIFA on it all the time. And I was taking one of the heads of one of the major law firms here through a tour and pre-pandemic, and she was like, how do you police this? And I'm like, you can't. This is the generation. It's, work and play, right? So of our 2,000 KPMGers, about 400 of them are coded to an office here in our Ignition Center. And these are the data scientist types that work on extreme automation projects for our clients. And what that means is and you're going to hear a lot about that today, and I'll get to Robin and Greg in a second, but robotics is like child's play for these people, right? That's just basic stuff. It's now cognitive automation, artificial intelligence, data enablement, predictive analytics, IoT, 5G, all this technology that businesses need to use today. And as board members, you should challenge your executive leadership team on what is your strategy around all of this. And so we bring our clients. So when this opened originally 7 years ago, it was an internal facing workspace used to attract and retain talent to work on client engagements, to reduce cost, improve quality, and unlock value through data and analytics. What we found, though, is that our clients wanted to be in here meeting with us and workshopping. And so the space that was designed for internal use then suddenly became very external facing, which is why at the beginning of the year, we began a renovation, which you're now sitting in. So our innovation lab stretches all the way that way, and this, wall divider will open up for large groups. And then right in there is what we call our emerging tech studio. And so we have developed content we can walk folks through that, we've shown clients technologies around IoT scraping for signals repository and predictive, decisioning. We also have a story around, some of you may know this better than I do, but apparently of all the Beatles music out there, a lot of it is known to have been written by John Lennon. A lot of it has been known to be written by Paul McCartney, but then there's a good chunk of Beatles music where the true author isn't known because it was a collaboration. But through data and analytics, you can compare the music notes and patterns and then predict, was it John Lennon as the lead or Paul McCartney as the lead? And it's just a really interesting story. And you could say, well, what does that have to do with, audit or tax or advisory? But when you bring your clients in here, the number one thing you want them to do is let go of current state, right? So open up your mind, think about innovation, which I know Robin is really going to, invest in this conversation from that perspective, and just think about the art of the possible, like unlimited budget, unlimited time. What would you like to see accomplished? And so that's what we start our conversations with. And by the end of the day, our clients have a beeline on a target operating model that they can, work towards. And guess what? We can help them work towards it too. So it's an investment we make in our client relationships, and it's an investment that pays off for us. So with that, I was told to keep my remarks short. I will pause before I hand it over to Greg and Robin, but any questions about our Ignition Center here? Okay, if you have any follow-on questions, please email me or call my cell phone directly. I'm happy to speak to you about it. And I would just like to thank Robin for being here and coming into town, right? Yeah. So your space out in Peachtree Corners is fabulous, and all the things you're doing there with the incubation is just so amazing. And I'm just so grateful for it because Atlanta is a city of innovation. So thank you, and I know it's going to be a great presentation. Then Greg is an amazing partner, and I'm sad that he is retiring soon, and he is going to enjoy retirement, but I'm sure for the right situation, he would be open to engaging with companies. But in terms of cyber tech strategy, platforms, and then you'll hear his perspective on AI. It's just he's a talent that we will sorely miss at the firm. So I'll let both of you continue with your own personal introductions, but I'm very grateful that you're here with us today.
Thanks, David.
And I'm going to take the mic from you.
Oh, great.
That way, since we're recording, they can actually then hear us better. Is that a little bit better? Yeah. So I thought I'd get us started. I'll introduce first. I am Robin Bienfait, and I know many of you here in the room, but if you don't know my background, I worked for AT&T for almost 23, 24 years. The reason that is when you go out to have children, they subtract years from your age of service. I don't know what that math is about, but I retired from AT&T as what they call last man standing. And when I was in that stage, I kept getting this phone call from this gentleman that had invented the BlackBerry. And he wanted to know what I was doing with his BlackBerry. And I said, I hacked into it and put a mobile app on it. And he said, excuse me? I said, well, yeah, part of my job, I run Bell Labs, and I have about 11,000 scientists and engineers, and one of them figured it out for me because I wanted to put this mobile app on this device so that my teams out in the field didn't have to drive back into the office to pull a ticket and find out what work that needed to do. And I'm automating the network. He said, can you come visit me? And I said, well, I have to kind of stand down a little bit. I'm the security cleared person at the company, so I can't travel right now, but I'll come out and visit you. And my first AI deployment was in 1999. So there's a lot of people who think of the AI hype as today, and it just happened on the news in January, but it's been going on for quite some time, and probably even before when I started. So, you know, being in that space and then going to work into mobility with Mike and Jim Basile at the time. In fact, I played golf with Jim Basile on Monday, and then I was at the Quantum Ideas Labs on Tuesday. So I stay very invested in technology. Went over to work for Samsung as their Chief Enterprise Innovation Officer in Suwon, South Korea, and decided I needed to do tech for myself. So I bought a building in Peachtree Corners. It's about 45,000 square feet, and it is a global tech accelerator, not an incubator. An accelerator is where a company comes in that's already got a capability and they're just looking to get bigger traction. And we want companies that are outside of the state of Georgia to come into Georgia to land and expand here. And so all of the 90 plus companies that are SaaS companies, there's 2 that aren't full SaaS, but they all have some type of AI deployment already embedded in their technology. So this is not if it's going to happen kind of conversation. And I hope that from our conversation today that we have an interaction, because the dialogue is really good and strong, and that we get a chance to share with you some of the insights and things that you take back to the boardroom so that when you're governing over the company that you're engaged with, that you can actually, you know, help govern their journey and roadmap to AI and AI capabilities. Craig, why
Thanks,
don't you?
Robin. And every time I hear Robin's story, I'm always such amazed and just thrilled that we have her in the Atlanta community, and her passion for growing technology in Georgia is just so exciting. So thank you for all you do, Robin, and all you've done. By comparison, my background is probably a little bit more boring. I am a native Georgian. I haven't gone to Korea and worked there, done a lot of exciting things, but I did cut a lot of my early teeth at the Coca-Cola company before joining KPMG. I was head of internet strategy for the Coca-Cola company in the mid-90s, which was a lot of fun. I got to explain to Roberto Goizueta why he would want to send an email to somebody outside the Coca-Cola company, which was surprisingly a difficult conversation. And then 25 years ago, I was recruited to come to KPMG, and it's been a thrilling ride for me. I spent most of that time really helping the firm and our clients in understanding the risk related to cybersecurity. And that was really my first exposure to the NACD and this great organization. I'm a fellow with NACD on cybersecurity and training for board members. And then more recently, about 5 years ago, I was tapped on the shoulder and was asked to become our internal chief technology officer. As we think about how we bring all of the data we use within KPMG, the data that's very trusted to us by our clients, it needs to be secured and protected and available, and bring new solutions to our clients. So I spent about 5 years helping internally platform our innovation systems, our security systems, our cloud systems, and more recently returning back to the marketplace and finding my passion is just with my clients. And so I love getting the opportunity to meet with folks like yourself and share some of these complicated topics. And really what I enjoy doing a lot of times is busting the myths. The problem is with a lot of the press we have today and the media we gather, you have to get a lot of information into a 15 or 20-second soundbite. And so you spend a lot of time giving the headlines, but not a lot of depth. With topics like artificial intelligence, which is going to have such a direct impact on all of our lives and all of our businesses, it's worthwhile slowing down a little bit and taking a little bit more worthwhile conversation. And that's really what we want to do today, is Rob and I having a little conversation about what we're seeing in the marketplace, understanding where this could go, some of the risks, some of the opportunities, really talking about value and what we see kind of happening over the next few years.
And I thought it might be fun. How many of you have actually played with OpenAI at this point in time? So a lot of you have. I thought it'd be fun just to do a little demo.
Sure.
If you do just a little demo, just to kind of warm up the audience, because this needs to be a collaborative conversation. While he's putting that together, I'm also from Valdosta, Georgia. So yeah, put me in South Korea. That didn't do very well. I lasted 3 years. Just with a Southern accent. Well, at least it was South Korea. I told him, I said, we were at least had something in common. We're both from the South.
Did you learn any Korean?
I learned a little bit of Korean. It's about as much as my French and some other things. I don't try to speak it because it sounds really funny coming out of my mouth.
I apologize for turning my back to the audience just for a second, but I have to cut and paste a couple of things. So we mentioned people were familiar with ChatGPT from OpenAI. You guys experimented with Claude a little bit. It's another very similar type of chatbot experience. I love the opportunity to just feed it weird questions and see what kind of comes up. And several of you mentioned your experiences today in working with it.
And this is a KPMG tool, right?
This is not a KPMG tool.
This is yours.
These are all public
All public,
domains.
okay.
We've got examples. We can show you Google's example. This is Claude by Anthropic. Works just like GPT. You can ask it a question. You can see here what I did was just pick a topic that's very impactful. Can you devise a comprehensive plan for making an impactful entry into the e-health services in rural Georgia? And basically, can you examine the cultural implications, what you do about it, and give me a breakdown of how this should work? This is a topic I think we all realize today in our state. You know, a lot of local hospitals are closing and not being well integrated. So e-health sounds like a good example. So let's see what our friends at Anthropic might say. So you can see we're not going to go through the text is here. If anyone wants a demo, I'll share all these prompts out if anyone wants it, but it walks you through without any real kind of prompting these real issues that are impactful to us. The ecosystem, there's not a lot of broadband out there. The people tend to skew more conservative, not quite as trusting. The marketing, how we think about getting the awareness of these type of services being available. The partnerships working with church groups and community leaders will help. And then some of the metrics will help.
It doesn't want to stop talking.
Oh.
Georgia.
Oh, did it?
That's what humans need to be in.
There you go. There you go.
And that's where you go back to have a conversation. The AI is only as good as the data.
Exactly.
I don't think Russian's going to get you far in Valdosta.
Oh,
You'd be surprised. Definitely in Northeast Georgia. But this just gives you kind of the example for those who haven't been aware of it. And it's got context. So if I could say, let's say, make sure this example is for the state of Georgia and not the country. Let's see what it does.
as you're seeing,
It redoes it. So again, these solutions all have great context and understand it. And you can just give it a little bit update.
so I apologize. Here we go.
So it just gives you kind of an example about what you can do with it. And one of the examples we see a lot in our demos are probably some of the same stuff that you might see today in what you do. I want to draft an email, but I just don't know where to start. Give me a couple of examples. Or I want to get this process done, but I'm not sure where to start. Help me get some insights. Chris, I heard a story about Mark, your husband, the other day. He uses this as kind of your own personal travel agent nowadays, doesn't he? So there's a tremendous amount of capability here. And all of us over time, where we're used to, if you're used to your Google activities, your Bing activities, and how we used to search, we think about today as the web, you're going to see a lot more experiences will be a lot more around these types of interfaces as opposed to the traditional kind of search bar.
So it's going to sort of turn into your own personal assistant, right?
In a lot of ways, it does. I've got another demo maybe in a little bit. I'll actually build an assistant for you real quick with your help. But we'll get back to the presentation for a second.
Go right ahead. So as you're thinking about this, a lot of the companies that you either are, so I'm on the board of an insurance company, and they are, you know them as Lifeco, London Life, Irish Life, Canada Life, and they don't have a very, they have a technology team, but they're not your, yeah, they've got actuarials and your typical IT team. So, driving a data scientist and data analytics, they're, trying to attract that type of talent, but they're fighting for talent just like you guys are fighting for talent. And when you think about the things that you're doing just in the cyberspace, because that's another top risk factor and capability, there's 38 million open jobs right
Yes.
now in the cybersecurity space. Just think about the gaps that you have for talent in a domain that's just now kind of coming out into the school systems and in some of but it's really about the corporation's data and whether the corporation is really ready for this type of capability. So when you at KPMG were looking at this and partnering, I guess, with Microsoft, what did y'all go from an internal perspective first, or did you do an external activity?
We really, so we've been using, I'll kind of start with a broad topic, but I'll get down to the topics around generative AI because that's where a lot of the newness kind of comes in. As mentioned, we've been working with advanced data and analytics for decades. This is nothing new. It's built into most of our platforms, from our audit platform, our tax platforms, all of our various different advisory platforms, that ability to collect data and manage it. The goal for us is to do that that aligns to our clients' expectations to secure that data, as well as securing our own data. We do have services where we've collected data. We call it our signals repository, where we've collected billions of points of data that help to enrich our solution, our data that comes from our clients and others to help us. But we started down a journey to really figuring out how we could exploit and gain value from this new generative technology. We set out with a pretty direct plan. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I apologize. It's going to probably run through a couple of slides here that we've already covered. And all of these will be made available for you. But one of the things, I'll just take a second and talk about the details that are very, very small, but I just look at the slide a little bit. When we talk about artificial intelligence, there's a lot of different elements to it. And a lot of these are very mature, the analytical side, the prediction side, the reasoning, the knowledge. Vision is very, very exciting. The elements we've been able to do over the last decade around computer visioning. We've got experiments we did for large retailers that actually will fly drones through their stores at night when they're closed, taking images of all their shop shelves to look at restocking purposes, just using visuals. When we do inventory counts, we've got smart goggles we wear to actually take images and will actually do the visual count for us to validate us human fallibility. But the topic around AI generation is very, very interesting because it involves these large language models that are curated by billions of reference points. And there's a little bit of risk associated with those because no one's 100% sure what those reference points are. And there's lots of regulation and even lawsuits going on today just to try to make sure those reference points were legally obtained and managed properly. So that's a risk we'll touch on just a second. And also, as you add context to it, some of your data can become intermingled with those large language models. And so we don't want our clients' data to be intermingled with these public internet accessible solutions. Many of our clients have put restrictions over use of that. So we had to think a little bit more intelligently. So we started on this journey today. This is our projects we've been doing with Microsoft for the last several years. And we started with creating our own version of ChatGPT using the OpenAI algorithm, but it's on a very secure, isolated part of KPMG's environment.
And
So
you're keeping it inside the company.
We keep it within
So
our
you
virtual
started
walls.
your journey for internal purposes.
Internal. We used the public available solution and then customized it. And that's available today to our roughly 100,000 users on an active basis today. We generate about 20,000 individual queries a day, and it costs us about $10 a month. It's really amazing.
And how do you keep your employees from going out and using KPMG data outside in the open AI environments?
Thank you. We've got a lot of restrictions. I'll show some of the details on the next slide, but we've got restrictions that don't allow our average professional to go to some of those sites because those data could be quite challenging to upload And as new technologies become available, they're vetted very quickly and rapidly. And if they
Do
can't.
you guys have like a sandbox within the corporation to bring them in? And the reason I'm kind of teasing this out is a lot of us in the corporate world, if we're sitting in the board, we're listening that our companies are blocking certain things. But at the same time, I know the employees trying to write their email using some type of open AI source. And by doing that, they're actually taking corporate data, putting it into an external engine, and that data now becomes part of that large language model,
Absolutely.
which a lot of people don't realize. The moment they do that, you're actually building that large language model for that open AI source. And it's very hard to corral your employee base and to know that, hey, I'm writing a great memo. We're going to be doing business with DuPont or Delta or somebody. And when they put that message out into that space, now all of a sudden that becomes public knowledge and public domain. But there were no rights granted.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the governance needs to come into play.
I think you're spot on. And this was our solution, which this slide's a little bit technical, but I'll be glad to walk you through it, or if you've got your team members. But this is exactly what we do. Every time we create, one of our professionals wants to use ChatGPT, we create our own privileged copy. And that copy can then be tuned with that client data, so we don't intermingle client data. It's got KPMG's knowledge already in tuned inside of it. And it's only accessed through the controls of our application programming interface. Our APIs only allow our data to be accessed by authorized KPMG people.
So
this is
you
our
guys
sandbox.
take data sovereignty into a big issue.
Big
So
issue.
a lot of us don't understand the laws of data sovereignty. We think of, oh, the data's got to be in this country or that country. It actually is your client's data.
Absolutely.
And that sovereignty of your client's data needs to be also protected as you're working through any of these large language models.
We have to track down, given our internal regulatory environment, every bit of data, where it's stored, where it's transmitted, and where it's used. So we have to understand which country it sits in, which cloud provider it sits in, how it's managed, where that laptop is.
Now, do you use an AI engine to track that for you?
Not yet, but that's on the books right now. We've got registration through the use of this solution that helps us track that a lot more.
So your first deployment was internal, and I always share with people the best way to go about experiencing this is internal to your operations. Learn first inside some piece of your organization. Use something that's maybe external, bring it in, make sure it's only having access to your internal environment. Learn how to keep those barriers around it so that you can manage it, because it can leap out of the environment if you don't want, it's not like a virus or something that is going to expose itself, but it's very easy for it to go and gobble up data someplace else and bring it into the model. And then you can't tease it back out. You'd have to revert back or something. It makes it very hard.
Yeah, once the model is taught, you can't unteach it.
Right. It's like the toothpaste is out of the tube. Yeah, that's and I think that's the lawsuit that's going on right now with ChatGPT and is it the New York Times?
It's one of many, but yeah, the New York Times is probably the biggest high profile one. Is, again, the producers of these large language models, they have to have English or in this case, English or language in order to process and train it and to teach it how to work. And these are the largest large language models available today. It's about 70 billion vectors. You can think about that as a word or a sentence structure that it's managing. That's the size we're thinking about. It's relatively massive, and they're growing by leaps and bounds. Most of that was gathered by scraping information from publicly available websites. But there are other avenues, and people believe that their intellectual property may be involved in this. And if their intellectual property, if they're an author or they've created some unique bit of IP, and if it's available now, they're losing rights. And that's why there's a lot of the lawsuits creeping up and potential regulation kind of around that.
So this goes back to whose data is it?
Exactly. And again, I think it's also important to add on to that, whose data is it, but is it the right data? The part of the problem around these technologies, as you saw with the example we gave before, which wasn't planned, but it's a great segue, the context is very meaningful, and a lot of words or a lot of concepts mean together. And the way these solutions are built, these large language models, these algorithms are designed, they want to give you an answer. They want to give you, please. And if they don't have the data, they will sometimes make it up. It's what we call hallucinations. And so you might get a recommendation to go to this really great restaurant. It sounds wonderful, except it doesn't exist. You may reference a legal case that never was tried in courts. These are some of the examples. So while the generative AI side's got a lot of really interesting forces, it's got a lot of risks. And so one of the things I think Robin and I were talking about before we started was, how should companies think about this? Is there a high level roadmap? And this is the starting of the roadmap. It needs to be tweaked for every individual organization. Some are probably well advanced and can skip the first half of this. Others might need to think back or step back and think about it again. But I think starting with the strategy and working through understanding your data sources, planning out the governance, understanding how are you going to use it, and how are you going to measure if this is valuable or not, I think is absolutely critical.
And even though you plan out your strategy, I think the governance, not only the governance within the company, but the board governance of what is going on and how it's being managed. And I truly believe that there's kind of two things that each one of us that sit at a board should be guiding or advising our companies with, is they need to be thinking about an area within their business that they could leverage AI, and they should get a project around it. This is not a if. They should be thinking about how AI might help them in their business. Don't think just automation. Automation is one big piece of it and can be an important part, but it really needs to be, how do you want to practice AI, and where is a place that you can actually leverage the capability and learn from it and put governance around that. And the second is, where does AI play in your solution or your product or the service that you're deploying? And pick a program to get started. You may not be the one, because you have to think this is just like almost anything else. If you're building a large language model, or even a small one, because sometimes the smaller ones work and operate a lot faster, you still have to maintain the model, and you have to maintain some level of data quality so that you understand that you're going to be getting the real quality of information activity that you're looking for. And I remember, and I'll just say this out loud, so here I am at Bell Labs, and was so excited, and I don't know how, it's probably been 30 years ago. They put out this little wizard, and it's still there. It's this little wizard in the email thing that says, hey, you can automate your email messages. If there's something that, and I get an organization of 11,000 people, and I'm thinking, I don't want to have to keep sending my email for organizational announcements out to everybody. And this is just an example of a little bit of AI and automation. Hey, when my string shows up with, this is an org announcement, make sure it goes to this group in the organization so they can hear about it. Well, what it doesn't think about is, what if somebody comments on that organizational announcement? And what if it's a negative comment? Within a matter of 3 seconds, an organization announcement goes out, and then the comment coming back was, how did that person get promoted? And now 11,000 people see that comment too. So you've got to think about the ramifications or the outcomes that you're looking for. And a lot of us are kind of like, okay, this is this black box. Well, not really. We kind of should be thinking about, when we design the AI model that we're going into, what kind of outcomes are we looking for? And it's got to be in places where a human capability can't move that fast, can't handle that many data points. And you're going to be helping and aiding that decision and insight by leveraging the AI engine that you're engaging with. And that's a hard thing to think about. And that's why the strategy is so important.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I think the lessons we've learned a lot when you're actually want to use this for product, or when you think about integrating it in, context matters. And making sure that you understand with some degree of focus what that outcome is you're looking for. Is it a reduction in time? Is it an increase in quality? Is it reduced cost? I think one of the most illuminating examples, I'm working with a client right now, they are gung-ho. They fully believe in the opportunities around generative AI. They're in a multifaceted business. For them, though, it's a question of value. That today, given the security and the concerns and the challenges that we talked about that they're very much aware of, they realize that they were to integrate with this technology too soon, they're going to spend a lot of money to secure it and have to make it really secure for them to get value. And they know they're going to get value, but they're not sure how much that return on value is. Are they going to actually lose money because it's going to cost more to secure than they get? And so when you think about those use cases, sometimes the value is just doing the experiment, training your teams, having them understand if they're a challenge internally, given your industry locations and customer expectations. But just understanding what that value you're looking for is and how you can measure that. That seems to be one of the refrains we hear a lot, is how do we determine value? Lots of ideas. I think KPMG, I've got a couple of examples. We've identified well over 1,000 potential use cases for dozens of different industries for this type of technology, but not all of those we believe are relevant for every one of our types of clients.
Yeah, and there's different types of AI. So you're talking about generative AI. So I work with a team out of Israel that does behavioral AI. And that behavioral AI is actually something that you and I, how we touch the laptop, how we move with the device, how we sit, maybe even the way we look at a camera. And all of that tells them that when you're logging in or doing a banking transaction, that you're a real person and that you're not somebody stuffing the credentials behind the keyboard. And they're in, I want to say, about 70 banks in Europe. And they have the ability, because now think about this, as you just said about any AI model, it learns with the more data points it gets. So you're going to want to work with a AI engine that's had a lot of years of learning and a lot of data points, because it's more sophisticated, more capable. And they're now launching here in the United States. And this capability is a preventative capability. So, our behaviors, I kind of thought, well, really, I type that differently. And the interesting thing is the way you handle your hand on a mouse or keyboard or even touch a screen is very unique. And that's very interesting to watch how they're capturing those little touch points to really identify that you're a unique individual and not another AI bot coming in to do some of the same things. So I just find that interesting. The other one I'm working with is they're called the human experience, the HUX team, and they're conversational AI. And when you drive up to a Wendy's or in this case in Canada, Timmy Hortons, you're actually talking to an AI engine and you're ordering, and it's a large language model learning the syntax of a particular company and its capabilities. But this is because they can't hire people at these, retail locations and fast food locations. So it's replacing that human experience, but giving you an experience that may be even better than the human experience that you were getting, because it's going to be very consistent. It's going to be able to be changed very rapidly to address the new items on the menu or whatever else. And it's more than automation, because it actually will listen to what you're saying and kind of determine, is this a person that would rather have a man or a woman talking to them at the counter? And it sounds like they've got a French accent. So maybe I might speak a little French to them and see if so there's a lot of tuning that can go on in this capability. The one thing that we can't do because of privacy regulations is say, hi, Miss Bienfait, you were here yesterday. Do you want the same thing you got? And do you want to upsize that? That kind of conversation you can't do, even though they know it's me that's come back for a second time. That builds into their CRM tools for other things that they may offer me through other loyalty programs. There's a whole bunch of things that you're going to see that are going to be, kind of touching us in a way that might improve our life and our experiences. But are you guys experimenting any with the conversational AI or behavioral AI at this point?
Absolutely, all the above. And the exciting part, I wish I had a demo here, but it requires a little bit more complicated than just a laptop. But to Robin's point, that conversational AI, we tend to think about, we've all been to the website, you've seen the examples today, it's a chatbot. You type something, get something typed back. there's nothing that prevents that from being created or curated into a voice. It can listen to your voice and translate it back with a high degree of accuracy, and it can create a voice back. Even more so, it can create an image. And so it could create a video image of a man, a woman, anyone you want, that their lips match as they're moving to it. And in many cases, these are becoming indistinguishable from real people. And so we anticipate the next generation of those front door customer service, not just in the store and ordering establishment, but online, will be some form of an intellectual bot that will present as a human interface. We see that today. There's a wonderful little example. I can point you out to a couple of examples that will take video, to your point, speak a different language. Videos recorded in English. You want to hear it in French. Take your voice, redefines it in French, changes a little bit of video editing to change your lip movements to make it look like you're speaking French. Seamless. It's amazing the way things are happening so fast and so rapidly around this type of technology. But how this then, so the technology exists, how do we get in the hands of people that has a high degree of trust? How do we get it into the right environments we can monetize this value? And how do we control the risks and the governance? And that's really oftentimes where the board kind of comes into play in your fiduciary, your responsibilities in being able to challenge your company to make sure that they're thinking about the opportunities this technology provides, making sure that those experiments, as Robin suggested, are taking place or at least being contemplated. And then again, that management is doing their right by governing, making the right investments to protect the company and the brand through those types of
And
activities.
so some of the things I guess we're going to be seeing in legislation or the regulatory space is how our data is going to be protected and when GDPR might be coming into the United States. Because when you see how they're governing data in Europe with the fines if the data is used inappropriately, or if it's my customer data, I can actually recall and redact my data. That capability has to be within our company's capabilities as well. That's hard to do. And if you don't have somebody that's within the corporation looking at like a chief data officer, how many people have chief data officers in the corporations that they work with? Yeah, so I have one as well. And the question is they really don't get a lot of time at the table in the board meeting. And so one of the boards I sit on, we are really actually pulling off to have a separate technology committee, and that technology committee can report back to the board. And I think with all this new capability, part of that board governance is maybe looking at having a technology committee so that you can step out and have a deeper conversation. And it's not that the rest of the board is not smart enough to have that dialogue, because they all want to listen to the dialogue. But there's a lot of education that takes place. I mean, and I'll just be very honest, when I hear the audit report and the CPA talking, sometimes I sort of glaze over because that's not something I listen to all the time. And it's kind of a different vernacular if you haven't worked in that space a lot. And yes, I know that when I ask a question during the audit review, they're probably saying, okay, why is she asking? Well, because I don't know what that word means. And just want to make sure I'm not missing something. I'm sure that when the technology folks sit down and they start with their vernacular going back and forth, but I think there needs to be a capability where there is going to be a need to have that technology committee, an official one, as opposed to a lot of them have what I call the shadow technology committee off to the side. And do you guys, from a KPMG perspective, kind of have your own technology committee? Is it off to the side? Is it part of the bigger group?
We have a technology risk committee that represents part of our board that sits there. It rolls up underneath our operational committee, but it is separate to think about those because it's such an important part of how we focus. And we typically see the evolution, the audit committee typically holds most of the enterprise risks historically. And sometimes you may have a risk committee, and as you suggested, technology committee. So we're seeing these topics, but we saw this evolution with the cyber journey as most organizations evolved and got really good at handling cyber, understanding what fits right for your organization and your board complement to make sure you can address these topics fairly and accurately and just demonstrate your due care. But that's exactly, we recommend the same thing. The questions should be asked by the people who can make sure that they understand what the answers are getting from management.
Well, I think this is quite challenging. I'm going to open it up a little bit to see if there's some questions, because I see some questions on some faces.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. exciting conversation. I would also add an and to it, technology and innovation committee.
Abs-
So I think that's what you do for
Yes.
Robin in your incubation center. It's like to solve those sustainability issues, you need to innovate. How do we make sure our models take less energy and so on and so forth? You are here to solve tomorrow's problems, whether it can be cybersecurity, quantum is coming in, making data unencrypted, etc. So it's so you need to attach innovation to the technology and make it more interdisciplinary, as Robin was mentioning. How do we make sure other committees understand the language of that? And the faster we move toward the left, more closer to the business to drive the value, that's where you get it. And then the last point is, though that era was gone where you used to innovate internally, you literally need to, again, I'm amplifying Robin's area, making it more open source, make sure that you don't outsource your competitive advantage to an API call, but how do you co-create, understand, make sure your global challenges are solved, and it's becoming more like interdisciplinary.
And the interdisciplinary is very important because you'll learn and be more creative in that space. And that's why I kind of the topic that it's like, who's your partner?
Mhm.
There are going to be partners that you need to have at this table for different reasons, but it's that interdisciplinary capability and the ability to get the right talent to the table. Oftentimes we don't have the right talent, or we have some of the right talent, but we need to augment that talent. And it's not that all of us are going to be able to hire it. We need to have that partner come to the table.
And then I go back to that, this is a hot topic. The business value and societal value are inextricably linked. If you need the talent, you need to do more of what Robin is doing, engage with Georgia Techs of the world, students, Georgia Tech and Georgia State University, all the community colleges are equipped with the latest technologies so that as we grow, we have a workforce that is ready for the future.
Very, very true.
I think it's important for board members to understand what's going on and not just hire experts and then say, okay. I mean, they need to understand the language. And if they don't, they're going to.
So I sat on a board that, and I won't mention which one, it's now 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the board members just kept asking, why do we need RSA keys? I don't even know what an RSA key is. And I kept thinking, okay, for somebody that is in a business and you're asking what an RSA key, and you keep asking about this RSA key, and I'm thinking, okay, should you be on the board? And I know, the person was probably the best controller on the planet, but there's something about our business capability that we should have. Even the board member needs to have that interdisciplinary. So there's parts of me that says, okay, there's a role for the Nom and Gov committee that needs to make sure that there is talent around the table at the board table that has a bit of that little bit of taste of, because even for myself, they weren't going to bring me onto any board unless I had, I think my MBA or something was told them I could read I could read financials. There's some assumption that because you were a CIO or a CTO or a CISO that you don't have any business acumen. You're just a technologist. And they need to make sure that you also have that business acumen. Well, the reverse also, as we move into this digital and technology domain for all of our companies, even your other people on the board need to have some technical acumen. That's exactly.
They need to make an effort to really understand and speak the language, because then they can learn. Just two things happened today to me. 8 o'clock, I had a dentist appointment. And she said, well, which one is the problem? And I said, it's number 18. She said, number 18? I said, yeah. I said, I know what the issue is. Oh, wow, okay. And then later on at 9:30, I had an appointment with the eye guy. And I wore contacts and I couldn't see so well. I had a my right eye distance because I had surgery last year on my right eye. And I said, well, I think that we need to change that power from minus 1.0 to minus 1.25.
But see, you're doing your homework.
If you have that, so, hey, I walked out happy as a clam with 1.25. Here, it has
Yeah.
nothing to do with my dentist or my eyes. It has to do with, it's important for us as members of the board to stay up to date with the lexicon and understand what's going on. Otherwise, we shouldn't be there.
Right, and to a certain degree, you know, until some of the board kind of moves more into that digital space, you'll still need some crossover because a lot of I see a lot of boards are still in the old domain of their environments, and a lot of this it's got to move at the same time.
Well, it's happening so fast.
Yeah.
That you need to keep up with it.
Yeah.
Okay, and some people can't. It's okay.
Yeah, and it's okay, right?
On the same continuum and on the other extreme, the board is aware of the technology and everything, and the company is very keen on continuing moving forward because for one side of the business, this is important. A practical advice, you know, given that there's no governance and given that there's still no guardrails, shall we then continue to move forward and then say?
I think there's got to be some governance. And even at the board giving the governance to the company about the company's own data and the value of the data and how we're going to manage the data. Are we going to allow our employees to put that data out into an open source tool? Are we going to bring the open source tool in so that our data is now walled into an area so we can learn? We need to understand that, because if we don't, and there's kind of no guardrails, as you put it, then your employee then doesn't feel that, oh, okay, well, I just took this contract that I got and I put it out in Chat GPT so it could review it and tell me where the issues are in the now your contract's out in the public domain.
No, I think the basics are covered.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, you know, there's always going to be pioneers. And so therefore, it's a company's decision to say, I want to move forward because I know this is good. I know this is going to add value. So I just want to go ahead and do it. So that's what I said, a practical advice.
Yeah.
When there's unknowns. But the things that you're mentioning are more basic, and yeah, there's basic protection guardrails. But when things are becoming a little bit more, you know, progressive, is the board, I mean, what does the board?
I can give a couple of public examples because they're not necessarily KPMG clients explicitly, so I can talk about them. But for that very reason, there's some very high profile names. JP Morgan Chase is one of them that has restricted the use of some of this technology internally.
Right.
Now that is, they've stated that's a point in time restriction, but because they don't feel prepared enough to govern these experiments, these activities with some of these, they've chosen to put a company-wide halt.
Yeah.
And that while they're putting in place or thinking through the governance, that's not explicitly the board, but management, the board working together, I think came up with this. And I think if you look at this bottom row of potential issues, you know, that could be a huge brand impact to your company, the lawsuits we're seeing, the potential regulations. If you're not comfortable, perhaps the best thing to do, as you suggest, might be to put a small pause on it, but make sure that that's properly communicated so you don't have any accidents kind of falling through. But as you get ready, I think the question needs to be, and I think, Robin, you alluded to this earlier, this technology becomes a great equalizer in a lot of ways, and it becomes incredibly competitive. It gives you competitive advantage in a lot of areas. So if you're not moving, you could fall behind in certain sectors. And so finding that sweet spot is unique for every company. And I think that's really part of your responsibility as a board, to ask management those questions to make sure you're comfortable in how they're responding.
Just to add.
Yeah. And just jumping in the water doesn't mean you're going to learn to swim. That doesn't. So getting out there, you can actually drown really fast. and actually open yourself up to a lot of infringement and, releasing data that you're not wanting to release, which would be a critical advantage to maybe a competitor. Sorry.
You had a good point about chief data officer. Only very few companies have got chief data officer. Along the same lines, we need to have chief AI ethics officer, where as he showed in the previous slide that talks about strategy development, where you have use cases like a spectrum, low, medium, complex. Low use cases doesn't need to get an attention of AI ethics officer, but when it comes to high complex, the AI ethics officer needs to make sure when those use cases gets approval, funding should be approved until it is clear. So it's an evolving process to make sure going back to that interdisciplinary mindset.
Exactly. I think we had another question over here real quick.
Hi, my name is Maurice. I'm fortunate to be a part of a few companies whose CEOs do see the value in what you're talking about. So I've seen the benefits of it and really appreciate the conversation. My question is, you mentioned earlier that you guys have a nominal cost associated with using your internal, the model that you created. Could you share a little bit more about the process of actually creating that and what the cost would look like that for maybe a smaller company that wanted to build something out like that?
Yeah, I can, it might be better, Maurice, if we can catch up a little bit. I'll give the high level overview, but I could probably answer a little questions with a little bit more specificity. But part of the value of why our costs are so low is the fact that we have invested so much over the years as we've moved to be cloud first. We built security from the ground up and we built data governance from the ground up. So our ability to create a new large language model is just as easy as us as creating a new folder in our desk. All the security is kind of behind the scenes for us. And we can, all of that is automated. So a professional just needs to request, press a button, request, click through a couple of elements. And so the cost of building that infrastructure was a lot more, but we've done that over decades, moving to where we are today. And so the addition of OpenAI and some of those large language models were relatively nominal, and we're just consuming them as a traditional cloud service would be, knowing our data is secure. But I'll give you a little bit more detail as to how we're doing it if you'd like to understand a little bit more. That's a great question.
Thank you.
My question, both Robin and Greg, is just around this slide. You got 10 challenges. Clearly, today we're awash in misinformation. So, and right now, as your example showed, AI is contributing more to misinformation, not less. So what is going on in the technology community to give us like that good housekeeping stamp of approval that this dissertation that was just written by ChatGPT, everything in it is correct and it's not BS. And then the other thing I would like to know is, AI basically amalgamates data. It doesn't create data. It just it looks at the data and it makes conclusions. How can it invent a restaurant that doesn't exist? Because all it did was look at all the restaurants in the world. That restaurant wasn't there, but yet that's almost like consciousness, which AI doesn't have. So I'm really confused on that.
Well, you bring up a lot of good points. I think number one, as you think about the risks that we talk about up here and some of the value that we think about, it is how do we understand that underlying foundation? And it's really hard on the internet. It's hard inside of an organization where you might have some starting of data governance or data quality, but which version of data, which quarter's worth of data? I may have my quarters of financial data, but my customer sentiment might be 2 quarters behind. And when I merge them together, so these are disciplines that are just now starting to evolve, and we're learning how these come together for better. And so there's some companies that do this extremely well and can match the data up very well, but it's a complicated problem. The trusted source is something, there's a lot of great organizations working on this right now. There's a desire, a strong desire that we have some form of federal kind of regulation underneath it, which many would concern would actually impede the progress of the technology, but may give some support. There's been a large number of investments over the last 6 months with AI designed to catch other AIs that all fail. None of those have tested out incredibly well right now. What we're starting to hear whispers of, and we're seeing some examples of it, there's a new large language model called Llama 2 that Meta, the owner of Facebook, recently released, and they're building more by crawling the internet. This is the same way that Google built a search engine by crawling the internet. And there's some technology elements you'd put on your public facing website that can tell it whether that's a site that could be crawled or not, or which parts could be crawled. For example, the New York Times has blocked those crawlers from using its articles, even if there's a legitimate user with a username and password, from crawling. So there's starting to be some of those elements coming in of technology governance, but they're opt-in, not required. We're also seeing organizations talk about having a model, a contribution where you can say, okay, I opt in for the book I wrote to be added. Well, then how do you get fairly compensated for that? If that's being used by trillions of people, but you're only, 10,000 words out of 70 billion, what's your fair, contribution to that? And so
But
these are
your-
early conversations.
Your book might have been the one that created the illusion restaurant.
Go, Jim.
And I would tell you, I work with a team out of Prague that they only invest in the Israeli startups. They like the Israeli space, and there's a lot of great cyber companies coming out of there, but there's also a lot of great AI companies coming out there. And I've yet to find one that can go and say, hey, I can mark your data and make sure that that data is verified no matter where it goes.
Source identification.
Source identification or some type of cert or something. There is a company that I work with up in Nashville, and they have figured out how to inoculate data. And the inoculation to the data doesn't allow the data to go somewhere that it shouldn't go and can't be read by something. So what you're having, though, when people do that type of stuff, when AI then works against the data, it might not have the true source of data, and it's working off maybe a malicious or maybe even an altered state version of data. And it's going to be even harder when you're using data in the medical field. And Mario, you gave a very good example. You're using something in the medical field, you want to make sure that that data is really clean, mainly if it's making a decision on a surgery or something that you're going to alter within your health.
One of the interesting things, Jim, just real quick, and your last question about the generative side of it, that's one of the parts I find really interesting, because that's really my background. Believe it or not, when I graduated in the 80s, my minor was in artificial intelligence. It's a very different technology than what we work with today. And this generative side is brand new. Well, one of the things I love is you take a lot of formulas, could be chemical formulas, could be I like alcohol formulas. And it can do some interesting things. This is one of my favorite. We were talking about this before, a demo we did just a little while ago. But, ask it to make you a drink. In that case, we'll see. It's thinking about it.
The problem is no real drink will come out. Yet. Exactly.
We're working on it. But again, we just said, hey, we like tequila, we like spice, we want to pair it with Indian food. And we said, figure it out. Now, it read probably millions of cookbooks, millions of recipes, and figured out these ingredients coming together would probably taste pretty good. If you really want to have fun, you cut and paste this and have it draw the picture of it to put by your
Even
meeting.
muddling the grated ginger. How about that?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So, and I'll just give you a little flavor. So the AI I put in AT&T's global network was only using network layer data that was proprietary. So I knew the data was clean. I knew the data was only from the machine. It didn't have any outside source. It was all contained. And that's something you can really grow fast. So you might even, when you're thinking about within your own corporation, where do you have that instance where you know that your data, somewhat I'll call it contained, proprietary, that you could do something with that and learn from it really fast? Either learn the vernacular of the data so it can be used faster. I'm sorry.
Just a quick story. So I'm about to join the board of a healthcare company. I'll say the name. But in my last rounds of discussions with the whole process of being interviewed, et cetera, they formed an AI council inside their organization at the middle management layer. And they gave them the charge to drive the model going forward about how they were going to see and use both on the opportunity side and on the risk side. Every month, they're given a report back to the C-suite so that the C-suite group is educated with them at the same time. And then they're putting a formal process with the board. So my question is, Greg, I mean, you're seeing a lot of clients. This is the first time I had actually been exposed to a formal AI council that had been formed at the enterprise level, which I found intriguing.
It's great. And I would say people might call it different elements. They may call it a task force. They may call it elements here. It sounds like what your example is probably well articulated. That connectivity to the C-suite and that regular formal report outs is something that is still a little bit new. I haven't quite heard it like that. But I would say a lot of our clients have created some form of an AI council. One, an automotive manufacturer I'm working with has created a same level middle management kind of a generative AI council. We want to figure out what are the best use cases, where we think we've got data that can use it. And they would propose or recommend to management what they would do, how to govern the risk, not as formal as every month or like that, but they would go off, do their experiments and come back. And so I think that ability to have that experimentation closer to where the work actually gets done, the value is generated for the organization is always a great idea. The question is just making sure that they're good guide rails for that experimentation, for that analysis of that council. But it sounds like that organization is well structured.
Just quick, this is a Microsoft house.
Mhm.
So what have the Microsoft people been doing? They've been banging on everybody's door to sell a new tool.
Yeah.
So licensing morass that's going on inside that company and to harness and put controls around it has been a nightmare.
We can have a whole different conversation on the
Another whole
cost of data
dialogue
tools.
about that. And what they're trying to do, what they're trying not to do. Everybody's trying to get their arms around it.
So I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but when I was in high school, we went through this rigorous journey with math, only to find out that the TI-83 do, right? And I think traditionally we've taught those foundational concepts for some reason, right? My question is, and I'll direct it to you, Robin, because I used ChatGPT to tell me a little bit about your business background, and you've been around the block. So my question is, we know that there's an immense amount of value in AI. My companies are using it. My question is, do you think that there are any aspects of that type of foundational knowledge that we'll leave behind or lose over time? And what might the impact of that be?
The loss of foundational knowledge,
Later in
as a calculator. Well, and when I started, I used to program on these little metal strips and read it in and out of the computer. So I'm dating myself even with that. I would tell you over time, we're gonna not know how to code,
Uh-huh.
and that's an okay thing. We're actually going to be talking to a computer that's going to generate the code for us. And we're going to really have to start understanding outcomes of data. We're all going to have a little bit of data scientist in us. And I think that understanding of where the data is coming from, how it's being used, is the real fulcrum of what we need to kind of keep our arms around. And I always say, you want to know who owns the data. And I'm very particular. There's some things I don't put out on the web because you won't see me touted as a cyber person very much, because that attracts cyber people to try to attack me.
Mm.
And then I work with a quantum lab up in Ontario on some things, and I don't put that on there either because I don't want to know anybody what I'm doing in quantum. So there's things that you'll want to, all of a sudden, you'll have to figure out how to keep some of your own personal data, very personal. And I think the one thing we're going to have to start learning is how to protect our identity and really redefine what our identity means. I think a lot of us think of as our identity as a username and a password. It's really not. It's a whole bunch of other factors that we deal in. And I know we're like right at time.
Sounds like the birth of a new industry.
Oh yeah, well, we're at another. We went through that information age. We're really moving at quantum speed right now. Yeah. Well, I wanted to thank KPMG for hosting us this evening on the hottest, I think it's the hottest day, 100 something degrees outside.
Yeah.
And did you want to close for us, Marina?
We want to thank
You too.
both Greg and Robin. That was fantastic.
KPMG, Taylor, I'm sure she's gone now. Rosalie, thank you so much for helping us pull this event together. The wonderful thing about partnering with our sponsors is that we get to do these expert series. And these expert series are these just intimate gatherings that we get to have these kind of honest discussions about what are the emerging trends that are happening facing you all as board directors. So we're always thankful when people come out and have these very organic conversations with us. And we want to do that more with our other sponsors also. We have some great events coming up in 2 weeks. Mark your calendars. We've got Ted Decker, the CEO of Home Depot. He'll be lunching with us and having a fireside chat with us. We also have our, in October, signature event with James McAlpin, who's going to be speaking about building blocks of better boards. We also, our national office has their summit where we have over 800 members already signed up for that experience of getting together with other board directors all across the country and learning together. And then we also have an event in November with Jeremy Rainwater, who's the CEO of America's TK Elevator. It's going to be at their site, which I heard is absolutely beautiful. It's their innovation center.
Way up at the top.
Yes. Tourists, the ball.
Correct, right across the street.
And that's at November 13th. So the best way to do that is go on our website to register for that, or take your phones and scan that QR code. That will get you to our LinkedIn page and follow us on LinkedIn. And that will give you all the resources that we get from National, all of the upcoming events that we're going to be hosting, and also just spotlighting our members. We're going to try and do that a little bit more. We know that one of our new members, Linda, just became certified, and so round of applause, Linda. And she did it, so congratulations. But we hope to see everyone at the Ted Decker event. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you again, KPMG.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Crazy.
My name's Bob.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. I know.
So good to see you.
I have to.